Hello there, and welcome to the drawing table. I'd like to start doing a series of videos where I will go through a comic book from around the world or a series of comics from a particular title, and we will talk a little bit about the artists behind them and obviously briefly on their career, but we will mainly focus on one or two particular issues if it is a series, or one graphic novel if it is a standalone title. And the idea is to kind of go over the artwork and construct the art and give a little bit of opinion about it. For this first episode, I have chosen the run of Frank Miller in Daredevil, the original run from the late 70s, early 80s. Now, Frank Miller start working on the title at around issue 150 something, and if I remember well, by issue 168 he had taken over the duty of both the writer and the artist, to such point that merely after only about 4 or 5 issues he actually passed the inking job to Klaus Janson. So when you actually reading the run of Daredevil with Frank Miller as a main artist, you actually mostly looking at the inks of Klaus Janson. But then again, he follows the lines of Frank Miller very tightly. At the end of the run, Miller was really providing just rough layouts to Klaus Janson, and he was doing most of the work, to be honest. Now, this is quite a memorable run, famous one that still to this day obviously resonates, as the Daredevil in Netflix series takes most of its plot points, characters, and inspirations from this series. So we'll just go and look at a couple of the comics in this run, and we'll talk a little bit about the aesthetics that Miller introduced to the comics as a whole. Right. Now, Marvel was in dire straits with Daredevil. They had started publishing the book bi-monthly, and there was ongoing rumors that they were going to cancel it altogether. Here comes in Frank Miller, which completely revamps the title to the point that after only a few issues in, after he took on both the duty as writer and penciler, they quickly turn around the fortune of the title to the point and only became monthly again, as it became one of the top selling titles of the whole Marvel line. Well, certainly in the top 10, sometimes even in the top 5. The thing with Daredevil is Frank Miller did something very, very ingenious. He picked up a series of second-grade characters, which were like out of the rogue gallery of Spider-Man, such as the Kingpin and Punisher, brought them to the Daredevil title, expanded on them, and created all this mythology around them, which made them not only interesting characters for the plot in Daredevil, but they also became big mythological characters in the whole Marvel pantheon. He introduced Elektra straight away on the first issue where he became the writer, so 168. And here in number 179, a few issues later, we have one of the most, again, using this word again, one of the most ingenious issues that he has worked in, although they're all brilliant. Now, Frank Miller, working in New York in a title such as Daredevil, and coming out of a decade where cinema had taken a gritty, violent road with a series of vigilante movies and a series of city-centered crime stories. Frank Miller picks up on that and uses a storyboard style panel construction for Daredevil, and also indulging in the environment that the city provides, since it is set in New York, in the slightly more dodgy areas of New York. such as Hell's Kitchen. First page here, this particular issue introduces a journalist which has a cough problem because of so many cigarettes that he chain smokes. And here straight away we get that noir kind of a stark contrast between day and night, dark and light. And in the cinema room, we just the projection booth, spotlight, bit of the audience exit, and we have our character talking to another one. And here, as a corner detail that most readers might not notice, is Electra's sigh with a little shine on the edge. And then we go here, page 2 and 3, and straight away we have Frank Miller at his best. Frank Miller really pushing the boundaries of what was being done at the time. Again, late 70s, very early 80s, with subject of concern there, getting stabbed from the back with a sign, and instead of having the sigh, Electra's blade ripping through the coat, we just have the coat stretching to the maximum, with the journalist's reaction being priceless. Here's a point of view from the back where Sai is stuck deep into the seat, and Electra's threatening that journalist, saying that she works for Kingpin. She's one of his hired killers, kind of a personal guard kind of thing. And she takes the sigh out of the seat, dripping blood, threatens the journalist, while the head of the guy that just died slumps on his shoulder. And great shot here, explosion on the screen surrounding the head of the journalist, and he's left in a sweat, a cold sweat, as the other guy is dead. And a nice little touch here that another head resting on the shoulder of a couple that are completely oblivious to what is actually happening. Now, most people can obviously buy this issue of Daredevil, or just buy the trade paperback and go over the pages and see what we're seeing here, and clearly notice the things I'm pointing out. Now, the objective of doing these videos is not to go over that. That's just exhausting and repetitive. The idea of doing this is just go a little step further, just analyzing a little bit more in depth, and maybe picking up some things that the average eye will not pick up so quickly. For example, these 2 pages here, side by side, shows again the unsuspecting brilliancy of Frank Miller, just kind of like stealthily coming below the reader and then just wowing on the page. Just by doing something very simple, really. You got long horizontal panels here that are basically dueling themselves from page to page, and they're really twin pages, twin panels. And you have then the smaller ones here as the journalist investigates and slowly gets to Matt Murdock, which then shows up on the window. And again, mimicking on this side, you have the parallel panels, but a little bit wider, as this one here shrinks, while this one here is a little bit longer. Now, this is done in a way to convey story. So there's no action here, there's only exposition, but Miller finds an aesthetically pleasing and well-constructed way of doing it. A little rubbing here on the ink. That's a problem with newspaper paper from the old comics, is that although the colors are always great, I love them, but there's always this thing that if the ink was not dried properly when the actual book was finished printed and then pressed, little blots of paint like that show up, and it's not necessarily bleeding from the back. It's just rubbing at the front. Now, a nice moment of action here with Daredevil picking up the weight that is being pressed on top of the journalist by some bullies at the gym, and then just whacking their faces with it and throwing the whole weight across the room to the older guy that runs the gym, like this, showing the strength of Daredevil. Then throughout the book, Frank Miller uses once again the creaminess and the filth of a city to illustrate his pages, and the buildings of New York and everything about it many times frame the actual panels, like the entrance to the subway, journalists going down to the tunnels. And then there's always a little bit of mystery surrounding Electra's character, and how there's a lot of duality between secondary characters that it might or might not be who you're actually seeing. There's a lot of realism as well in the narrative of Frank Miller. Characters are not necessarily pretty like in most comics still from the time. Miller was instrumental in breaking down a lot of the publishing myths, and together with Alan Moore, he ushered the construction of the superhero. There's middle-aged people, fat people, ugly people in Daredevil's run of Frank Miller. And again, wonderful uses of dead spaces and repetition, something that was, throughout the 70s, once Barry Windsor Smith opened up the Bronze Age with Conan in 1970, that the art changed, and a lot of new ways of facing narrative and interpreting narrative and showing narrative, they start creeping into the mainstream comics. But it was not necessarily until Miller and others did, and maybe also Neil Adams did some extreme leaps. Now, the action scenes in Daredevil, as throughout Miller's work from the early 80s and throughout the 80s, as do not forget, he does Ronin as well, a long graphic novel. He loves the Orient, and he loves martial arts, and he infuses a lot of his books with scenes like that, and he takes full advantage of what his heroes were conceived for. They're basically acrobats. They're extreme acrobatic actions coming from them. And some of the criticism that Miller might receive is that when doing action pieces, action scenes like this, sometimes things, the sequence of events, the sequence of movements might not add up as clearly to a lot of readers as adds up for others. But especially there's a special charm to the scenes with Daredevil and Elektra, because obviously they're lovers in the past, and then they literally have to fight to the death in other scenes and circumstances like this one. So it really is a love and hate relationship. And also pointing out that Miller loves scenes like this, pages like this, where action is conveyed with no dialogue, and each moment is given the exact amount of space that it requires. Daredevil falling through the roof, breaking through wood and bricks, and also something that is very interesting in Daredevil, and that's why Miller has an amazing approach to it, is that a lot of times he has to convey any panel from the point of view of Daredevil, or basically the reader putting himself in the position of behind Daredevil. He has to convey the idea of what is happening through the eyes of Daredevil, so through the mind of a blind man that detects movement and objects in a three-dimensional space differently from everyone else. And that is basically his main power, his talent. And the way that Miller, in a lot of issues, presents that is quite unique, quite special. He found a way to use white noise, to degrade white noise, creating objects and circumstances around it. So kind of a cutaway of situations. So this is him feeling the bricks coming at him, and then we feel the force of the bricks engulfing the character and throwing him to his doom. And and then a very, very thin panel, just with Electra, almost like a cutaway Electra through the cracks of the wood roof, and then the bricks where Daredevil rests. The journalist gives himself away with his cough, and Electra obviously does him in, and again a very, very cinematic, storyboard-like approach. Journalist realizing what he has done, turning around, running away, and then, well, realizing he's not going very far, and zoom into his eye, and then a breakdown of the same figure, but broken down into two panels with a sigh, cutting him through. Okay, so yeah, we could have gone through a lot of the issues. I just picked this particular one. They're all great. So it's really a question of you guys going out and buying it or getting it as a trade paperback. The entire run of Miller in Daredevil, it's not that many issues. It's really just Elektra Saga. That's really all you need to get. And from the moment she shows up to the moment she dies and then resurrects, we're talking about 20-something issues. So just pick it up if you've never had the chance to. Especially if you are a fan of the Netflix show. I think they do quite a good job in trying to adapt this run onto the small screen.